Good afternoon and welcome to the Authority HOA. I am Michelle Stinson-Ross. I am part of the Authority Labs team along with Chase Granberry and Melissa Fash. Today we are discussing SEO audits, and I'm going to hand it off to Miss Melissa to introduce our guests.
Okay, hey everybody. Today we have two amazing people. We have Annie Cushing from Analytics, and we have the fabulous Alan Bleiweiss. We're going to start off and let them both introduce themselves. Why don't we start with Annie?
Okay, as you heard, my name is Annie Cushing. I blog at analytics.com. I talk a lot about digital marketing with an emphasis on measurement, and I've provided resources for marketers doing site audits.
Alan, how about you?
Yeah, I'm an forensic audit specialist. I've been doing SEO for a long time, and I do some consulting, but mostly it's about audits. So we do what we can to help those sites that need it, because there's a lot of sites that need a lot of help.
Great. Okay, so for a few people that are not quite sure what audits are, can either one of you kind of explain to us why they're needed for businesses and their websites?
Yeah, so I'll jump in. I mean, I think the main purpose of a site audit is, just to comb through your site and make sure there aren't any technical or ongoing issues that are hamstringing your efforts. So a lot of times marketers will put a lot of effort and a lot of money into their sites and there can be technical issues, SEO issues that are bleeding out your best efforts. And so that's where a site audit comes in. Some of the worst site audit issues I've seen have come from site redesigns and migrations. But you also get a big outcry anytime there's a Google update.
Yeah, and I'll add that most of the people who come to me are in a situation where they've already been burned in their Google visibility, the organic visibility. Whether it was a manual penalty, multiple manual penalties, algorithmic ups and downs, a combination, whatever it was, they'll have gone through everything they thought they could do, or they might have hired an agency that thought they understood SEO, but they were really a design agency or a web dev firm, and they didn't really have a true grasp of what SEO is at the deepest level. So that's where I come in. And then other than that, maybe it's you got a situation where you think you're squeezing out all you can from your organic visibility, but you just want to check, and so that's where an audit can help, right? Whether it's Annie or I or anybody else who specializes in audits, or it's your own team, an audit can be quite helpful for many reasons.
And would you say that every business needs an audit? Every business with a website? Would you go that far, or just businesses that are noticing that there's a problem?
Yeah, no. If you don't know that you've got everything squared away from an SEO perspective, how do you know if you're not leaving money on the table? That's my perspective. And in reality, because I do about 80 audits a year, I get a number of clients who think their site is healthy, and inevitably I find a dozen really important things that can be done that might not be done yet. And it doesn't mean they have to do that, yet there's a potential for better revenue, and it also means that there's potential vulnerability without an audit to a future Google algorithm, even if you haven't been hit in the past. So it's good just to get a health check at least once at this level, the kind of level that Annie and I can do, and then for yourselves or your team to be able to monitor on an ongoing basis really key factor points, data points, right? What are the key metrics that matter to being able to help monitor the health of the site. Those are things that you and your own team can do on an ongoing basis. So it's really like a mini audit at that point.
Great.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think realistically, that's not usually how it goes down. Usually, for someone to start thinking about a site audit, they usually start, drowning. Like, they see something wrong with their site, they flap their arms for a while, try to figure it out, they try to tread water, and then as their site goes, slowly under, they start looking into, okay, what do we do from here? How do we pull out of this? So it would definitely be ideal to approach a site audit the way Alan just described before there's a crisis. Because once you're in a crisis, it's kind of like, not getting a physical checkup for, 10 years, and then all of a sudden you go to get a checkup and you're inundated with, results from, your blood work and this and that, and it's obviously going to be a lot more overwhelming than if you had gotten your annual checkup. Now, I'm not saying that you need an annual site audit. That's where the analogy breaks down. I'm just talking in general, if you can approach it from a perspective of, hey, we're at point A, we want to go to point B, and we want to make sure that our site is taken care of and that there are no issues, hamstringing our best efforts. You're going to have a much smoother experience than someone who's been hit by a major penalty and now everyone's in a panic, because it's much harder to get things done when everyone's panicking. So.
And Annie, would you say that audits are affordable for every business, or?
Yeah, so typically I find that most of my clients for audits have been mid to enterprise level. Typically the smaller clients, just we get to the quote part and the conversation kind of drops off, even with kind of discounting them for being a smaller site and things like that. And so I will share this at Melissa's urging, because I wasn't going to talk about this, but this is the reason I produced an audit document to help small businesses, smaller organizations that would never be able to afford a site audit. Most site audits usually run between $5,000 and $20,000, but for enterprise level, they can go up to $40,000. And so most, at least small businesses, that's going to be a little out of reach, because it can be hard to justify when you're part of a small team taking $5,000 to $20,000 or on up and putting it toward a site audit. So I created an audit template. It's a do-it-yourself document. It's 140 pages, I think 52 checkpoints, like almost 100 explainer graphics that really kind of take you by the hand and walk you step by step through the audit process. So I think at the end of the hangout, or at some point, Michelle's going to share the link for $20 off today only. Excuse me, up to midnight Eastern Standard Time. Excuse me, and now I'm choking.
Great.
Yeah. So Annie's walkthrough self-guided audit document is something that I reviewed and took a deep look at right when she came out with it, because it's not that I don't know that she can do audits or train people. In fact, she's one of the very few people in our industry that I personally trust, other than myself, when it comes to the ability to do audits, and where she goes even further in her ability to train people in a simple to follow along way with all of the different training that she's done over the years. So that self-guided audit is really invaluable for people who just want a straightforward checklist. I actually have on my own site an audit checklist that covers all of the major concepts that go into SEO audits, broken down into groups like the primary on-site factors, primary offsite, secondary, and then case-appropriate factors, right? And where this year I've added to it a scoring system that if you know how to do SEO generally already, and you just need a step-by-step guide about what specific things from a broad topic perspective do we look at. I've got a list of over 80 things, 80 factors or 80 factor groups, right? And there's a scoring system that you can use to get an idea of how healthy the site might be. So you've got the range of opportunities from both of us. And there's a lot of other resources that are out there as well from others that are really skilled. There is no simple 5-point checklist, for example, or
Yeah.
five. You know, the reality, the top 5 things to check are what I've come up with is a phrase called QUART, Q-U-A-R-T, and that stands for quality, uniqueness, authority, relevance, and trust. And those are what I call the 5 super signals to SEO. And anything that you look at related to SEO needs to be passed through that QUART test. It doesn't mean you've got to get quality and uniqueness and relevance and authority and trust maximized in every one thing that you do, but you need to get enough of at least some of that for the search engines to be able to accept and give your site maximum value to that individual factor or that group of factors, right? That's the best thing that I can say when it comes to, quote, the top 5 list.
Okay. The next question I had for you is, let's say that a business believes that the people they have in-house can audit their site correctly, right? How does a business owner or a board decide it's time for a new set of eyes to look at things and determine if everything's working correctly? When, you know, because I know a lot of people hire SEOs and they think they're doing what they should be doing, but sometimes, as we've seen, websites tank. What recommendations would you have for businesses on how to make a decision regarding that?
Yeah, so I think if someone has someone on staff who is reasonably confident in their auditing abilities, I think if they have, you know, the right resources, they could potentially do a decent job on the site audit. I think sometimes especially when you have a larger organization, so like what the organizations that Alan really focuses on. I know Alan has done site audits with sites on a regular basis with, I believe, millions of pages. So when you get into something like that, I think it can be a little more difficult when you're, you know, enmeshed in the day-to-day to, you know, kind of pull back and get that 100-foot view. Also, having been in-house, a consultant, and working for an agency, I think also when you're in-house, you can get a little more wrapped up into personal loyalties. So if you know, if you know someone in the company who was responsible for something that ended up breaking the site, it can be tempting. It's already difficult to kind of be the canary in the woods, saying, you know, because anyone who's doing an audit is basically coming in and, you know, we're going through everything, but what the site owner is really hearing is, you think my baby is ugly. I'm posting all these pictures on Facebook of my baby and you're telling me my baby is ugly. And it's very difficult for them to kind of divorce themselves from some of those emotional attachments. And someone in-house can get caught up in those, where you want to bring something to someone's attention, but you don't want to get someone in trouble. You don't want to get yourself on the wrong side of, you know, someone. So there are a lot of political considerations where when you bring in someone from the outside, and I'm not saying bringing someone in from the outside is the best. You know, there are just times where, one, it can help to have an unbiased perspective, but it can also be good to bring in someone who's not tethered by some of the politics that can weigh an in-house person down. So.
Yeah, and to build on that, one of the political issues that I see quite often in the work that I do is that the in-house SEO knows what they're doing and doesn't get the kind of respect they necessarily deserve because they're in-house. So sometimes I get hired purely to be that outside confirmation point. Is what this person is saying really true? Is what they're recommending really accurate? You know, and that can happen more often when a site isn't moving in the right trajectory from an organic perspective, and the in-house person or the in-house team has literally done everything they can within the limited resources that they're given, even in a large corporate environment. So one example, I did an audit on a site that has 470 million pages, right? And the company has 20 people for the whole company. So there's just one person that does SEO. And there's 2 developers or 3 developers, and then there's internal challenge that exists because that one person can only do so much of the time on an ongoing basis on that scale, and then to get the developers to be able to respect them and trust that they're making good suggestions can be a challenge. But in this particular case, that company had like 5 or 6 other sites all on that scale, and I audited one of them. And the developers aren't full-time devoted to that one site. So how do you confirm in a way that C-suite is going to trust they should take the developers off of this project that the C-suite put them on to address this issue? Again, a lot of times it just comes down to whether there's enough trust from the in-house people, even though they may know what they're doing. So that's a really big factor as well.
And since you brought that up, Alan, I had a question for you. Out of all the audits that you do and the failures that you see, how many of those can be attributed to different departments not working together effectively?
I don't know if it's a matter of not working together effectively as much as it is different departments not recognizing and understanding the importance of SEO needing to be considered in every department that has their hands in the website, right? That's usually the cause behind the not working effectively together issue when that's an issue. And sometimes they work really effectively together and they still miss it because not everybody is truly up to speed enough when it comes to SEO specific to what they're doing or how they're contributing to the process. One example is if you've got a marketing department and your SEO is only one among several different people or several different teams, you might have one team within marketing that's doing offline sales efforts through, advertising, right? Or even if it's online through banners or whatever else. And I see pretty frequently a situation where they'll come up with a buzzword for that campaign, and it's a marketing thing, but they're not coordinating with their Twitter team or their Facebook team, and they're not coordinating with their SEO to make sure that that new buzzword or that particular wording that they know in their business is properly integrated across all the channels in a way that people who don't know that buzzword are going to either recognize and understand right from the beginning, or for those who do a search on that buzzword, don't end up at a dead end because there's no content built around that properly, right? Those are where disconnects can happen. And it almost always comes down to individual teams not having a full enough understanding specific to their team's mission about SEO.
Great. Thank you, Alan. All right. The next question I had for you is, how often does a business need to invest in an audit? So, Alan, if they paid you in 2013, or Annie, you tell me, if there's an algorithm change, do they need another audit? Or how often do you do these?
For me, because of the wide range of clients that I serve. I do offer audits to the really small businesses that can recognize that the $3,000 or $4,000 they might pay me is something that's worth it, even though they're a really small business. They're like, oh my God, $3,000 just for a document, right? Well, if that's going to generate $100,000 in revenue, it's obviously worth it, right?
Right.
The smaller the site, the more stable the site is to begin with, the less need there exists for a major audit. And this is where I talk about how site owners and managers can just monitor their sites on an ongoing basis. That's also another another service that I had put out there. I have an ebook. It's a guide to monitoring your site's health, right? Sometimes that's all you need, because when you properly monitor the right signals and metrics, you can see if there's a problem that needs attention. And then you won't necessarily need a deep audit for that. You may, but it's more likely a case of, oh, wow, this one signal's shifted. We need to fix this one issue because the data shows exactly what the issue is. The bigger the site is, the more likely they're going to need an audit more frequently. Typically, though, even then, it's only once a year or once every 2 years if the original audit identified enough major issues and if that work was done properly in the first place. Quite often, I'll get a situation, typically 7 or 8 times a year, so almost 10% of the time I have sites that I do an audit on, and then literally a year later, they contact me saying, we did everything and we're not seeing any improvement, what's wrong? Sometimes it's because they didn't do enough of those things. Even though they did X, they might need to do more of X. A great example, new quality content on the site to support a particular phrase, group of phrases, or a goal. Sometimes just a little bit of extra content isn't going to be enough to push the needle. But a lot of the time, most of the time, when it's a year later and they complain, I can literally spend 5 minutes poking around and see they didn't do like 60% of the things I recommended.
Yeah,
So,
that's a
yeah.
big issue that I see too. I hope I didn't
No.
mean to interrupt, but just the lack of follow-up, and so like I use a Google Doc with a spreadsheet where I have a breakdown of all of the major issues addressed in the audit, and I include that template in the other template. And then I'll have a column for when this was fixed and by whom. And sometimes I'll go back even just 3 months later because they still have me share it on the doc, and I'll see that they've done fewer than 50% of the recommendations. So one thing I explain to them is that I'm not wed to any of the recommendations that I make, and even when I make the recommendations, I realize that coming from an outside point of view, sometimes there are other considerations, and so when we have the meeting afterwards, we'll even shift the priority order and things like that. But sometimes it's like a company just moves on to the next thing. They get so far into the audit and then other things come up, or the developers push back on things, or things like that, and the audit has never been completely implemented. So one thing I do and recommend that other people do when they're doing a site audit is, as much as possible, don't just address the issue. Like, I see this wrong with your site. The more detail that you can provide in how to actually fix the issue, the more face you'll be able to save with the developers, because developers do not want to go back to a marketer and say, I'm sorry, let me just copy my boss in on this. I don't know how to fix this, And so I really try to save their dignity as much as possible, and I'd rather that they say, whatever, I know how to fix this, than to, for something to not get fixed because they didn't know how to fix it and they didn't want to ask. So, as much detail as you can provide in an audit, I think the smoother it goes. But even with, and I provide like step-by-step, I provide screenshots, all these things, but still not everything will typically be implemented.
Yeah. Thanks for adding that, Annie. Those are all absolutely valid situations that I see as well.
And I just want to mention real quick to our audience that we do see your questions, and we're going to get to them shortly. We just have a couple of more questions for Annie and Alan. Okay, this is the big one. If you had to choose 3 of the most common mistakes you see when performing audits, what would they be? Alan is smiling.
3 of the most common issues?
Mm-hmm. Or mistakes, yeah.
Or mistakes, yeah. People thinking they understand the really complex relationships, but they truly don't, right? So, I know SEO. Well, you know SEO a lot of the time because Google put out a webmaster help page that says, okay, now we have this thing called canonical tags, and here's how to use them. And then 6 months or a year later, Google comes out with what was then Google Webmaster Tools environment and is now Search Console. URL parameter settings, right? So those are 2 different ways you can enhance the ability to communicate to Google and Bing what's going on with your website. In reality, though, they actually relate to each other, and you can confuse the message from one high-level or advanced signal to another. And a lot of people really don't understand that up front because Google doesn't go themselves into talking about the conflicts that can come across multiple signal points, right? You get confident because, well, Google says this is what you need to do, and they provide great. I'm not saying Google doesn't provide really clear instructions and recommendations for individual factors that they are willing to talk about, like with schema. It's just that their systems, for whatever reason, they don't very often go into the clash scenarios in their documentation. So that's at the top of my list. Annie, what's the 1 or 2 or 3 things for you that are like the biggest mistakes or biggest confusion?
Yeah, so one of the issues that I see really frequently is well, just crawl issues, really significant crawl issues. So one thing that I tell sites is, if you go into Google Search Console, which, as Alan mentioned, used to be Google Webmaster Tools, they love to rename things constantly. And you see you look at the number of pages that are indexed on your site, and then you go into Google Analytics, and you look for the same period of time at the number of pages that are actually getting organic traffic, and if there's a huge variance between those 2 numbers, you potentially have a crawl budget issue. So every site has a crawl budget. When that crawl budget is hit, it's just like any other budget, except you can't fall back on credit like my shoe budget. But when you hit that budget, the Google bot or Bing bot, or Google Mobile or whatever, the bot moves on, and so I've seen clients, especially e-commerce clients, that will have a variance literally in the millions, because when you have a site that has tons of query parameters, which you see a lot on e-commerce sites because you have color equals yellow, size equals medium, these are all query parameters where it's this equals this other value, etc. And you get all the different permutations of those URLs, and you just open them up to the search engines, and you say, there, I want you to crawl everything because I think it's all awesome. Then, that's going to hurt your site potentially, because now you're sending Googlebot in. We'll just focus on Google because most clients don't really care that much about Bing. You're sending Googlebot in, and it's crawling through, potentially millions or thousands or tens of thousands of pages, when in reality there might be a small subset of that that's actually important. Those are the pages that you would actually put on your sitemap, although some sites even make the same mistakes with their sitemap. They just throw everything in the kitchen sink at the search bots and hope that everything kind of comes up roses. But the reality is that typically doesn't happen, and so I really try to work with sites to help them to just put their best foot forward. Like if a site, if you look at a page and you say, yeah, I want that page to rank in the search engines, then that should be in your sitemap. That should be crawled by Google. If it's a duplicate page because of query parameters or whatever other issues you have with your site, then you don't want Googlebot crawling through those pages and wasting your crawl budget. So that's a big one. Another one, and I know that this is going to hit a nerve for Alan too, is lack of architecture on sites. That is really significant, and in at least small part, I would say probably a little closer to large part, some of that is the SEO industry kind of has to own that, because back in 2007, 2008, the SEO industry was preaching we need flat architectures, and so you had sites, because it was under the guy, and admittedly Googlebot, Bingbot, they had a more difficult time crawling sites, so sites were trying to get as many pages in the root or close to the root as possible. And now you fast forward to 2015, and some of these sites are disasters. They lack categories, they just lack natural organization structure for their site. So if you look at everything else, whether it's in nature or man-made, if you go to a library, if you look at, science, I mean, everything is organized and, into tight categories and stuff. But then our websites tend to be a bit of a free-for-all. And so if your site doesn't have that architecture, I'm always like really hesitant in ever recommending a site redesign, because I know that sometimes that can, well, most of the time that's going to hurt the site, at least in the immediate future. So I really try to avoid saying just like redo your architecture totally. But if you don't have a solid architecture, it means that you're going to have to work much harder to send those signals to Google that you own a particular topic. Like, I know site audits, or I know Google Analytics. If your content is kind of spread out, strewn all throughout your site. So the last one I'll mention is definitely mobile. So we kind of had a little bit of a scare with Mobilegeddon, and a lot of webmasters kind of focused on mobile for a little bit, and then when sites didn't totally crash and go under and lose all their rankings, I think a lot of site owners have kind of settled back into complacency. But I think that mobile is still presenting really significant issues for site owners.
Yeah, I just want to throw in to build on the architecture concept, because it's absolutely a pain point for me as well. When you walk in the front door of a house, let's say it's a mansion and there's 50 rooms. When you're in that foyer, in that front door entry, you do not have the ability to go directly into every one of those 50 rooms as soon as you walk in the house. The house is organized. The house is organized according to human usability, right?
Yep.
Typically, for example, the bedrooms are not right next to the living room or the kitchen in larger houses. In a smaller house, obviously, it's not necessarily going to be that separated out. But you could literally, in a mansion, you could literally have separate wings where there's an entire living bedroom wing, where those bedrooms themselves have bathrooms that you can only get to once you go down the hallway and around the bend and up the stairway. And then you get to the bedroom, and then you have to walk into the bedroom, and then there's the door to the bathroom for that bedroom. Information architecture is the same exact way. If somebody goes to your website and you have a site navigation that itself links to all the things, that's already the issue, right?
Right.
But even if you have architecture from a navigation perspective that supports the architecture, where you have to click to a category, then you click to a subcategory, even though that might be proper architectural setup for navigational funnels, if your URLs are all your .com / every URL on your website, from an algorithmic perspective, it's 50 rooms all accessible from the front door. So yeah, that's another big one that I see way too often.
Okay, well I have one more question and then we're going to get to some audience questions. So let's say that I as a business need an audit and I call Alan and Annie but they're booked. How do you find someone that can do a proper audit, or do they just wait for you all to have some free time?
Oh yeah, no. If Annie or I are not available, sell your website.
We'll buy it.
No, the truth is, there are a lot of people in our industry who are really skilled at doing the right kind of work. The challenge is to find those people in a vast ocean of noise and clutter. Fortunately, people like Annie and I are so skilled and have built up enough reputation that a lot of agencies actually come to us for their audit work. So you may be hiring another agency and you're really getting somebody like Annie or me behind the scenes, which is great. And then there's people like Ray at Pushfire and Rhea at Outspoken Media, you know, and a number of other people who are really skilled at proper audit work. It's just about being able to find them and then getting verification, if you haven't ever heard of them before, that they really can do what they say they do. And that's the biggest challenge. Ultimately, though, there's tools. Like, this is why Annie created that self-guided audit, for that very reason. Sometimes a site owner can't afford $2,000, $3,000, $5,000, $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 for an audit, and where they can take that one document and follow along with it and get enough value from it that it can make a really positive impact. Yeah, that's what I'll say about that.
Yeah, I think. Well, first, I totally agree with Alan. I would look at things like, you know, how respected is the person in the industry, and how much has that person written on the topic. If not audits themselves, you know, technical SEO issues, you know, digital marketing with kind of a focus on more of the technical side of things. Not everything addressed in a site audit is technical. A lot of times it's just really common sense stuff. Like I'll go through the audit and I'll ask, you know, beforehand, so what do you want people who visit your site to do? Like, you know, what are your main objectives here? And then I'll go through as, you know, a new user and try to do those things. And I had one client who it was so difficult to check out. They rented handbags, and it was so difficult to actually finish the process that I went into their Google Analytics, created a segment for just people who actually, you know, make it to the other side of the gauntlet. And it was something like an average of, I don't know, I think it was like 15 or 16 pages. And they had, you know, their natural inclination was to think, you know, well, I think that's just because people are really enjoying looking around our site. And I had to tell them, you know what, your 0.02% conversion rate would suggest otherwise. It's a painful, painful experience to check out. Like, I'm like, damn it, take my money. And you can't take my money, you know, and then you're going to tell me it's because I was on Chrome and to try again on Firefox, you know, like what? You know, like, are you going to put a little Post-it note up on your site? If you can't check out, try Firefox or Internet Explorer, you know, like, so yeah, I think, you know, pretty much anyone who has spoken on this topic pretty significantly, written a lot about it, and appears to be like helpful, you know, like follow different SEOs and digital marketers on social media, ask them a couple questions, you know, just look and see how approachable they are. how helpful they are to other people, and those types of things.
You get what you pay for, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And the helpfulness factor is critical. So people like Annie, people like me, uh, Selena Vidya, and others in our industry who do audits at this level also provide educational knowledge that's critical to not only helping motivate site owners and managers and developers and designers and marketers to be willing to make the changes, but also so that they can learn from that themselves, and where the next time they go to do something, they're more likely to consider the SEO impact, right? So education is another thing you want to look for when you're going to hire somebody doing this kind of work. How good are they at educating the issues and talking about and helping you to get knowledge?
Yep, I agree.
Cool. Michelle, did you have some questions?
Oh my goodness, we're getting inundated with viewer questions, both in our comment section on the event and in our Q&A app. So I'm going to go to some of the people that have been waiting the longest. Alex Miranda posted in our commentary section, he said, I have a potential client who went from 35,000 search queries a month to 10 queries a month. Other than Webmaster Tools, how can I do a forensic SEO audit, and what tools would you recommend? And Annie, I think you said you had some tips for Alex?
Yeah, so I shared a link to the do-it-yourself site audit doc, but just a heads up, if they went from 35,000 search queries a month to 10 search queries a month, I mean, we don't have a gauge on how long, like are we talking 5 years ago they used to get 35,000 and now they only get 10, but if they're only getting 10 queries a month, I mean, that site is dead. It's DOA. You know, I mean, like, I have sites for my kids that haven't been touched since 2010 that are getting more than 10 queries a month, and I don't say that like disrespectfully, but I would want to ask a few more questions before taking on that client.
Yeah, I would offer that Google Search Console / Webmaster Tools is vital because it offers insights into a lot of different things that are happening on a site, and where it may point to one or more obvious issues, or where there might be a penalty, right? Unfortunately, if it's an algorithmic process, and just like Annie said, was it an overnight loss, or was this a 5-year downward trend? Looking at your analytics over that period of time might show individual drop points. There might be 1, there might be 30. Running it through the Penguin tool, Panguin tool, to look at your analytics if you have Google Analytics set up, can sometimes align a number of different known Google updates or penalties. But that can be a shiny object as well, because it's typically a cascading fall effect when it's over an extended period of time. And this is where you need to be able to go through a proper full life cycle audit sequence to get the real understanding, if you can, about what's going on. Just looking at 1 or 2 or 3 tools isn't ever going to give you enough insight when it's a long-term drop. If it's an instant overnight drop, it might not even be Google's fault. It could be your server has a really serious flaw, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that flaw might not be identifiable in Google Webmaster's environment. So,
Or it could also be that, like, if, let's say a site moved to HTTPS, then you have to start up a new Google Search Console account, because from Google's standpoint, that's a different site. You know, so even sites that have like partially migrated to HTTPS, I have to remind them, okay, well, some of that data is now missing from your primary Google Search Console account, and you need to open up a new account for your secured domain. So I would actually wonder if it's kind of something more along those lines than they really went from 35,000 queries to 10. If it's legitimate that they went from 35,000 queries to 10, I'd love to see a screenshot. I mean, like.
Well, Alex, there's your invitation. Annie's to take a look at this. All right. So let's move on. Slobodan Manic, one of our friends at SEJ, has a question. He says, "Hey guys, thanks for doing this. How do you recommend somebody get into the business of audits? Get a DIY example like what Annie has. Do a few on your own website, your friends' websites. What do you recommend if this is something that you want to get into as a professional auditor?"
That's a great question. I would highly recommend, well, I almost wish I didn't do the DIY document so that like I could recommend it without feeling like a skeevy marketer. But, you know, something like that. But then offer to do a site audit for different nonprofits, because most nonprofits out there will never be able to afford a site audit, and the people working for them probably, it would never even enter their minds, like, I wonder if we need a site audit. But, you know, you could approach definitely friends, but, you know, like, also approach some nonprofits and just offer to audit their site. If at absolute minimum, you know, they're getting their money's worth, you know, so, and you may want to, you know, be careful with some of the more impactful things, and I did try to, like, kind of issue alerts, you know, throughout the do-it-yourself document, so that, you know, you don't shoot a potential client in the foot. Excuse me. But, yeah, I would say, you know, get out there, get experience, you know, get your hands dirty and see. Also experience like the pushback from clients. So, you know, sometimes when you're newer to audits, you know, you're thinking in terms of, okay, everything by the book, best practice, you know, like, oh, I think you should change this because this is not a best practice. And I've seen quite a few audits out there. I've had clients, and I always ask them if they've had an audit done, just so I could, you know, look it over and kind of get some perspective, and also tread a little more carefully if a colleague of mine has recommended something that maybe I don't, like, you know, totally agree with. But sometimes you go in, and I've seen recommendations like, you know, you have 1,400 404s on your site. You should correct these, you know, find new pages and map these 404 pages to the new pages. Well, realistically, one, that's not going to happen. Like, no one is going to go through 1,400 404 pages. And, you know, and so it may be on some level of best practice, but I'm really more concerned about the 50 404 pages that have previously, you know, gotten traffic from organic, is a money page, you know, things like that. I'm going to flash, you know, the red lights at something that's actually hurting their business, and maybe let them know that, you know, like, you can look at these things, but you're probably not going to get a whole lot of ROI from fixing them. But a lot of that perspective has come from getting pushback on recommendations that I made early in my auditing career, when I was like, oh, people are going to want to do best practice, you know. So.
Yeah. Again, to just build on what Annie's talking about, it's just because you think you're wanting to do audits doesn't mean you're necessarily ready to, right out of the gate, work on a 10 million page website audit, right? So one of the best things that I can recommend is to start with a smaller scale, or start with just looking at, or start with just looking at one aspect of SEO. You know, a lot of it has to do with what your own real experience is in doing SEO. If you yourself don't have enough depth of direct hands-on experience, you're not dead in the water for being able to do audits. I mean, yes, I have some web development experience in the past. I don't have 15 years of development experience, and yet I have enough knowledge about it just from a little bit of experience combined with many years of learning and talking with developers, and then from there understanding how to properly test with the right tool sets to be able to address technical issues, right? So get what experience you can directly hands-on, and where you know you're weak, take the time to learn from the people like Annie and I who are out there, and there's a lot of people who have really high-level skill and knowledge, and accumulate that knowledge from all of these different sources and make that a basis and a foundation for the work that you want to do as an auditor. And don't be afraid to contact people like us through social media or email if you have individual questions that you're encountering a situation you're really not sure of. Because even if you think you know what you're doing, if you don't yet have the experience with that unique situation, a recommendation that you make that you claim is a best practice may in fact be a false flag, and it could literally do a lot more harm than good. Yet we don't expect the world to have to know everything all the time, and we're not arrogant, you know, self-centered people in terms of hoarding everything that we know about the industry, right? There's a lot of us out there who are willing to offer guidance for anybody who is looking for help within reason at no additional charge beyond what you might have paid for previously if you had hired one of us in the past, or even if you've never hired us and you just have a couple of questions and you want some straightforward answers. At the very least, somebody like us can get you moving in the right direction or know where to look. Don't go it alone.
Yeah, I also recommend, if you're really new to SEO, doing a certification course like what Market Motive offers. So I really wanted to learn analytics, and this was, I forget, like maybe back 2009. And so I took Market Motive's certification course in analytics, and it's what really made me analytics. But when I was in there, I had access. I don't know if they still do this, so I probably shouldn't be saying it, but I had access to all of their courses. And so in tandem, I took their SEO certification course, which was done by Todd Malacote, who's Stunt Double on Twitter. And it was a really, really good, solid, like lay all of the groundwork for this is what SEO is, and best practices and stuff like that. And so it can be helpful to kind of get that 360 view before you actually jump into the weeds and try to perform a site audit.
Great advice. Well, Michelle, do you guys have time for another question, or do you need to go?
I do.
Okay.
I'm good.
Fantastic, because we do have a couple more. I want to hear it real quick. Nate Klosser asked just a real short, simple question. He said, what mobile aspects should be included in a site audit?
Every mobile aspect. You can't just limit it in 2015 and beyond to just one or two concepts. It's all about user experience as the foundation for everything. It's all about brand visibility and brand authority and brand trust, right? What is the quality of the experience on mobile? Are you testing for page processing speed? Are you testing for mobile usability in terms of the font sizes and the screen adapting through responsive design or not? You don't have to, although responsive is more likely to help, right? There is no one simple, here's two things to check with mobile. Now, I will temper that by saying that for now, even though mobile usability specific to your mobile version of your site is going to impact your rankings to a certain degree, Google still relies on the desktop version of your site for the majority of the ranking weight. So don't just jump ship. If you have two different versions of content that show up depending on the device type, don't just focus on mobile, because mobile's first now. Don't let your desktop system language, for the desktop users. Don't let that languish, because that is a foundational basis for the mobile rankings even now. Google's working on a separate entire mobile algorithm. We're a long way out from that.
Yeah, so one thing I'll add to that is one really good thing about the whole mobile getting scare, which, I mean, I shouldn't say it was a scare. It did sincerely negatively impact some sites. But in kind of leading up to it, Google did provide us with some really decent resources. Like they have a mobile-friendly websites guide that's really good. They also have a mobile-friendly tool where you can put your site in, like, well, you could put a URL in, you'll typically put your home page, but you can also, test like your key money pages to make sure they're mobile-friendly. And it will give you a Boolean value of, yes, this is mobile-friendly, or no, it's not. And if it's not, it gives you a breakdown of the main issues that it found. And Google Webmaster Tools, well, now Search Console, it also has a mobile usability report in there. I linked to all of these in the site audit doc. But also, so there are, let me finish that thought. So there are a lot more resources out there. So I think Google anticipated the pushback, because we all cry like babies anytime they change anything. And so I think anticipating it, they really did their due diligence in providing resources, providing sites, giving us a heads up, and providing us some tools to help us get our sites mobile friendly. But also another thing that I would recommend is really get familiar with how to use Chrome's mobile emulator. So Chrome Developer Tools has a mobile emulator, because one of the issues I see is that typically a site will only test on a couple devices. It's basically, of the developers working on the site, maybe someone has iPhone, someone has Android, you might have a couple tablets, and that in the real world is typically what the site will get tested on. And Chrome has a mobile emulator where you can literally test your site on any device. You just choose your device from a drop-down, and I did a blog post and a video walkthrough of how to use it, knowing that, and I don't use any geek speak. I'm not a developer. I am a technical marketer, but I'm not a developer. But I'm very, very empathetic toward non-technical marketers. So I really kind of break it down, like, here's how you can use this tool. And it's a great tool to be able to actually see what's going on in your site as if you're on a mobile device, and kind of like what I was talking about before, go in and try to check out on a mobile device, try to sign up for the newsletter, try to do the things that are important on your site as if you're on a mobile site, and then if something's not working, grab a screenshot. But that report in Google Webmaster Tools will also give you very specific issues with your mobile site. And so the particular URLs that they found those issues on, so you can click through to the URLs, open up Chrome's mobile emulator, see for yourself, oh yeah, that text is too close together, it's hard to click on it. So.
And one last thing to add, because this is becoming more important now, when we're talking about mobile. Apps, what are you doing for app optimization from an SEO perspective, if you're even aware that this is now a thing, right? So I highly recommend that if you've got a mobile app or mobile apps, that one of the most important goals you should set for yourselves in 2015 is to integrate deep linking for SEO into your app and web environment where they cross-communicate with each other, where you set proper intent filters specific to app optimization. There's several things that need to be done, and a number of us are working on getting the tool providers to add app optimization testing tools to their suite of services. Hint, hint, Chase. So the reality is, this is really important. And Cindy Crum, for example, has already started on her own to create a testing process, and she's even making that knowledge of what she's already found and what she's already done available to any tool provider that wants to jump on that to then build actual tools into their existing systems. It's more about getting the industry up to speed than it is anything else for Cindy with that regard. But you can go to a place like Moz.com. Justin Briggs wrote a post back in February on mobile app search. So I recommend that you read that post. It talks about most of these or a lot of these or all these issues. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head. I just know that's a source I refer people to already. So it's really important that app integration, app SEO, app indexation is the new frontier for 2015 and 2016.
And you know, we did a hangout with Cindy Crum and Dr. Pete Myers, and she talked a lot about app optimization. That is available on YouTube if you all want to find it.
Good.
And Michelle, awesome. Do we have any other questions or not yet?
Oh my goodness. I want to say real quick that if you posted a question in the Q&A app that we didn't get to live, I'm going to repost them for you in the comments section. If I could please get Alan and Annie to go back to the event and look through the comments and see if there was anything that we might have missed in this discussion. I'm sure that the audience would really appreciate a quick answer. Anyway, but what I want to get to is Todd Malicote has actually joined in this discussion, and he wanted to throw in a question. He said, what type of solutions do you recommend for e-commerce sites with large site bloat, like Magneto plugins, Canonical? What are some of the most common best practices and solutions you all that? Yeah, I know. He's stirring up trouble, isn't he?
No. Yeah, okay, so it's Magento.
Thank you.
Okay, Magento is one of several framework and platform environments that's available for people to be able to quote-unquote rapidly deploy a large-scale website that may have e-commerce in it. But unfortunately, no one single existing framework is already out of the gate perfect, so there's challenges that may need to be addressed, like in Magento or with canonicalization, right? I talked about this early on in the Hangout. This is where those cross-signal considerations are really critical. And the first thing that I find when I see a really large site that's an e-commerce site, regardless of what the platform is it was built on or the framework technologically that it was built upon, is bloat that comes from, and Annie even mentioned this, the faceting, right? So if you have 3,000 widgets in your inventory and there's one main category for all of your widgets, well, you might have blue widgets and you might have red widgets, but if you have blue widgets that are 5 feet wide and you have red widgets that are 5 feet wide, those are separate facets or filters. And then you can even combine those, show me only the 5 foot wide widgets. Eventually you end up with 20, 50, or 100 or more combinations that can take a 10,000 page site and end up in Google with 5 million pages of duplication. So the very first thing I do is I look at those facets and see where we can pare it down. It's not about eliminating the ability for site visitors to be able to narrow down their search internal to the site, but where there's no value in the long term of making all of that stuff available to the search engines to begin with, right? If only one person a year looks for the 5 foot wide widgets regardless of color, there's no reason to justify having that indexable in the search engines. So you need to prioritize what are the most important variations and combinations. And it's both from a data that already exists perspective related to search volume, but also profitability. Because you might have a lot of people buying your $3 products, but if you're only making 10 cents per product, you may not find it as important enough to focus on getting that ranked properly as you would for a $500 item or a $1,000 item that has a much higher profit margin even though there's fewer sales. So it's really about looking at the real data and understanding which should be pared down and then making decisions accordingly. And there's several ways to do it. With URL parameters, the best recommendation actually comes from Jamie Sirovich. He taught me this one a long time ago. If you have URL parameters, personally, as a best practice, I don't want you to have them ever again. I want you to eliminate them entirely from search crawler functionality. If you need to keep them, though, once you've identified those parameter combinations that you don't want to have indexed anymore, the simplest, best way to address that for now is literally to go in, create a new parameter called NoIDX, N-O-I-D-X, append all of those URLs that you know you don't want to have indexed with the NoIDX parameter and make it equal 1, and then you could just say all of these pages that have the NoIDX equals 1 should not be crawled. So that's a really straightforward way. It's much more complex than that, but that's the foundational starting point I use.
Yeah, so I like to get really into the specifics. And so one report that is to die for when you're addressing issues like this is Search Console's URL parameters report. It's under the crawl category in Google Webmaster Tools. I still want to call it Google Webmaster Tools. Damn it, Google. But that report, it doesn't catch all of them, but it does a really, really good job, especially with larger e-commerce sites. As Googlebot is crawling your site, it's like when they come across a URL parameter, they just kind of toss it in that bucket. And then you can go into that report and you can see all of the URL parameters that Google has found on your site. And what I like to do when I'm going through an audit is I'll go through those parameters, and the ones that don't, I follow the same rules as that you would with like canonical. You know, I look and see, okay, does this parameter determine unique content? If it does, then that's a parameter that you want to keep, and you may want that parameter indexed. If it doesn't, like what Alan was talking about, if it sorts the page, filters the page, you know, in a way that you don't want to create like a unique page and have it, you know, you don't want to self-cannibalize your site. You don't want to have 14 versions of the same page with very minor distinctions competing against each other, because there's a good chance none of them are going to win. And so the ones that don't determine unique content, I remove those from the search engines. So my favorite way to do that, and I know SEOs are scared to death of robots.txt, but it's highly effective with query parameters. I'll just list the query parameters, excuse me, and I can provide a screenshot of how that looks in robots.txt, and it just says, okay, when you Google, if you see this particular query parameter, don't crawl that page, kind of like what Alan just mentioned. You don't want Google crawling these, you know, thousands, tens of thousands, potentially millions of pages that are all duplicate. So, and I know a lot of SEOs, I've heard a lot of people address this like in conferences, and they say just put a canonical tag on, and the canonical tag will help with indexation, but Google's still going to crawl the pages. So if you're looking at, you know, just keeping your indexation manageable, the canonical tag is very good at that, but it's not going to help you with your crawl budget issues, because Googlebot is still going to crawl all of these pages unless you tell it, you know what, don't follow that bone. We'll give you the bones that we want you to follow.
Yeah, and canonical tags, like Annie said, are very helpful for indexation decisions. However, no one signal is absolutely guaranteed to always work because of other signals that might conflict with that, and sometimes canonical tags are actually ignored. So while they are really helpful and they are a best practice and you need to be able to make use of them properly, don't assume that what you did is going to get the right results without you doing further testing as a follow-up. You might need to do supportive work to reinforce that signal as well.
I agree.
Great. Well, you guys have given us a very long amount of time answered questions, and we really appreciate it. I was wondering if you could tell the audience, are you going to be at any conferences where they can meet you this year or next year? How can they catch up with you if they want to meet you in person?
Well, I'll be lame. I actually took 2015 off from conferences. I had committed to one in February, and I kept the commitment. And the rest of the year, I've taken off to focus on things like producing this SEO audit doc, and I'm now working on an analytics audit doc, and then my book. But 2016, I'll be back on the conference circuit.
Great.
And for me, I've already been to a few audits this year. To a few audits. Oh my God, audits on the brain. Audits on the brain. I've already been to a few conferences this year, and I'm scheduled to speak at PubCon in Vegas in October on the How to Do a Site Audit panel. All right.
Hey, there you go.
With a shock. And I do have two other conferences that are in the wings that I'm not 100% confident that I'm going to be allowed the time to attend, let alone speak at, but we'll see how that goes, so I'm not going to mention those right now. And I've been pitching more this year, so we'll see what other conferences think I'm even worth bothering to have at their conference as a speaker, and then I'll put it up on my website.
Great. And are you hosting Epic Dinner this year again, Alan?
Yeah. If enough additional sponsors step up, that's something else I need to get back to pushing, in the next few weeks, is more sponsors are needed right now.
Do we need to do something about that also?
Yeah, Chase, you and I had already talked, and you committed. We just need to work out the number and the scale.
Yep.
We could do it here in the hangout. That wouldn't be awkward at all.
But I already have 130 people listed to attend the event. So yeah, I need more sponsors if it's going to happen. Great.
Okay, sponsors. Text Alan or tweet him at Alan Bleiweiss. Well, thank you guys so much for so much fantastic information. Our audience is loving all the info that you have provided, and we so appreciate the time that you've given us. And we love you both. You're both unique and exciting people.
Colorful.
Colorful and happy and fun. So we do really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, it's greatly appreciated on our end as well, without a doubt. This was an honor to participate in.
Okay, well, we will be putting this out via podcast. It'll be on YouTube, and we will be blogging about it as well. So everyone be looking for tweets from Authority Labs.
Do we have do we have somebody lined up for next time already? Should we mention that?
We are having a difficult time finding someone for the 5th because of vacations and back to school. We do have August 19th. We have Scott Polk and Carolyn Shelby discussing enterprise SEO.
Nice.
So join us, and then we will be sending out information for August 5th.
Sweet.
Sweet. All right, Michelle.
That concludes this episode of the Authority Hangout. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great day.
Thanks, Alan.